If there's one thing life has taught me, it's that people often underestimate the quiet ones, especially the ones who don't boast about what they've built. Hi, my name is David Carter, and before I dive into what happened, let me hit you with this. Have you ever watched someone confidently try to manipulate you? Completely oblivious to the fact that you're 10 steps ahead of them? Well, buckle up, because this story is exactly that. A young man, my son's friend, trying to outsmart me without realizing he was walking right into a system I spent 20 years designing. It all started on a Saturday morning when my son, Ethan, invited his college buddies over to test a business idea. I didn't think much of it until one of those buddies, Jake, walked into my house with more arrogance than a Wall Street intern fresh out of a motivational seminar. Jake was one of those kids who talked fast, acted confident, and believed he was the smartest person in any room he entered. He greeted me with a half nod, barely acknowledging me, which already told me the kind of kid he was. But I stayed polite. Ethan mentioned they needed to use my studio office because they were working on an app project. Sure, no problem. I stepped back and let them work, until I noticed Jake whispering to Ethan, glancing at me like I wasn't supposed to hear. The thing is, I hear everything. They set up laptops and papers. I heard Jake say, "Dude, don't worry about your dad. Old people don't get tech. We can use his equipment and he won't even know what we're doing." Now, normally I'd let a silly teenage comment go, but then Jake added something that made me raise an eyebrow. "We don't need your dad involved. Once we take his prototype ideas and tweak them, we'll own the rights. He won't even realize what we're pulling." That stopped me cold. My prototype ideas? What prototype ideas? I stepped out of the room just long enough for Jake to think I hadn't heard anything, but inside my head, gears were turning. You see, I've spent decades designing cybersecurity systems for Fortune 100 companies. The studio office Jake thought was just a fancy room is actually a fully integrated smart workspace, one that runs on software I personally wrote. If anyone touches a file, logs into a device, transfers data, or even tries to upload something to the cloud, I get notified immediately. And Jake? He had no idea he had just entered the lion's den. I waited 20 minutes before checking the real-time dashboard on my phone. And there it was. Jake wasn't just using my equipment. He was accessing restricted folders, the ones labeled under my old company's internal architecture blueprints. He was screen recording, copying, renaming files, and saving them to his USB drive. With every action, I received a detailed log. I could see him trying to bypass my encryption keys, rewriting metadata, even attempting to scrub digital fingerprints. Impressive for a college kid, honestly, but he was playing chess with the person who built the board. I walked back in, calm, pretending not to know anything. "How's the project going?" I asked. Jake flashed a smug grin. "Great, we're almost done." Ethan looked nervous. He's always been honest, not the scheming type. I could tell he didn't fully understand what Jake was doing, but he trusted him because they were friends. I didn't want to embarrass my son in front of everyone, so I played along a little longer. 10 more minutes passed. Enough time for Jake to finalize whatever little heist he thought he'd pulled off. Once the boys wrapped up, I offered them lunch. Typical dad move, right? They agreed, except Jake, who suddenly said he had to run. That was my cue. I stepped forward, blocking the door slightly. "Jake," I said calmly, "before you leave, I'll need you to hand over the USB drive in your pocket." The color drained from his face so fast he looked like he'd seen a ghost. What USB drive?" he stuttered. "The one you've been saving my encrypted files to for the last hour," I replied. Ethan's head snapped toward Jake, horrified. "Dude, what did you do?" But Jake wasn't done lying. "This is insane. I didn't take anything," he yelled. So I tapped my phone, projecting the real-time activity logs onto the wall-mounted screen in the studio. Line by line, timestamp by timestamp, the entire digital trail unfolded. Every file he copied, every name he changed, every attempt he made to override the system. All tied to his login session. All tied to his device. He froze. Ethan looked crushed, and I was done playing nice. In a calm, steady voice, I said, "Jake, I built the system you tried to hack, literally every trap you triggered. Every hidden layer you didn't know was there. Every log you thought you erased, I designed all of it. You tried to steal intellectual property that doesn't belong to you. And you did it in my house. Jake's attitude collapsed in seconds. He went from cocky to terrified, mumbling excuses about just wanting to impress investors and planning to tell Ethan later. I didn't yell. I didn't threaten. I simply held out my hand and said, USB. He shakily handed it over. Then I told him something he'll probably never forget. Real intelligence isn't about outsmarting people. It's about knowing when you're outmatched. I told him to leave. Ethan apologized over and over, embarrassed and disappointed in the friend he thought he could trust. I put a hand on his shoulder. Son, don't blame yourself. Some people learn lessons the hard way. Later that evening, Jake's parents called me, crying, apologizing, begging me not to press charges. I told them the truth. I didn't intend to ruin a kid's future, but he needed a serious wake-up call. I assured them I'd let it go as long as Jake never came near my work again. And he didn't. My son learned something too, that loyalty doesn't mean letting people walk all over you. And me? I was reminded that no matter how quietly you live your life, someone will always think they're clever enough to take advantage of you. Until they try.